Every day, a dog peered into a storm drain. When the drain was finally open, people were amazed by what they found inside. Stray dogs are common in many countries, but one particular dog fascinated people with its actions. In Turkey, there was a shaggy and dirty stray pup who walked down the street every day. He did this regularly to search for food and water. The day started like any other, with the dog happily walking down the road and wagging his tail at people passing by. Despite being a street dog, this friendly canine enjoyed receiving pets from people who passed by. As the dog walked along a specific street, it suddenly caught a whiff of something delicious. He followed the scent until he found himself in front of a butcher's shop. Looking through the window, the dog watched as customers purchased large cuts of meat. Just looking at the food made the dog realize how hungry he was, and his stomach growled loudly. Inside the shop, a young woman named Annie was finishing paying for a couple of large steaks. Once she was done, Annie thanked the butcher and left the shop. Once outside, Annie was walking down the street towards her home when suddenly she heard a loud gurgle and a whimper. The confused young woman turned around and saw the stray dog looking back at her with very sad eyes. Once again, the dog's stomach growled, and Annie immediately understood the problem. The dog didn't have a home, and it was very hungry. Seeing the hungry dog, Annie felt sorry for it right away. She looked at the steaks in her hands and then quickly returned to the butcher's shop. She asked the butcher for any leftover pieces or bones that he couldn't sell. The butcher happily gave her what she wanted. Annie left the shop and searched for the stray dog. She soon spotted him watching her from a distance. She crouched down and extended the bone towards him. At first, the dog hesitated and kept his distance from the woman. But as she continued to hold out the food, the dog couldn't resist any longer and cautiously approached to enjoy the meal. Finally, the dog began to trust Annie and wagged his tail as he accepted the large bone from her. But instead of eating the food right away, the dog carried it and walked off as if it had somewhere to go. Confused by the dog's behavior, but not wanting to question it too much, she stood up and headed back home. The next day, Annie saw the same stray dog as before while walking down the street. The dog recognized Annie and happily approached her with its tail wagging. She smiled and gave the dog lots of attention, petting and playing with it. Unfortunately, Annie had to go somewhere else and couldn't stay with the dog for long. Before leaving, Annie made sure to buy some sausages for the dog from a nearby shop. But once again, the dog didn't eat the sausages immediately. Instead, it walked away, carrying the treats in its mouth. Annie was curious about the dog's behavior, but once again, she didn't have time to follow him as she had other things to do. Instead, on the third day, Annie once again found the stray dog, and this time it seemed like he was waiting for her. The woman had started carrying treats in her bag, hoping to give them to the poor stray. The young woman smiled as she approached the dog and gave him the treats she had. This time, Annie decided to follow the dog as it turned around and walked away. They eventually arrived at a busy street, and Annie saw the shaggy dog making its way toward a storm drain. The dog sat down next to the drain and peered into it. He then dropped one of the treats that Annie had given him into the drain before eating his own. Annie was very confused. Just what was the dog doing? For the next few days, Annie noticed that the dog would sit and stare at the storm drain. Every time Annie gave the dog treats, he would drop half of the food into the drain before eating the rest. Eventually, Annie's curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to investigate what was so intriguing about the drain. Little did she know, she was about to discover something unexpected. Annie walked slowly toward the storm drain, feeling a bit cautious because of the dog standing nearby. However, the dog didn't growl or bark, instead watching her curiously as she approached. Once Annie peered into the drain, she let out a gasp of surprise at what she discovered inside. In that instant, Annie quickly grabbed her phone and dialed the fire department for immediate assistance. She knew she would need their help in this situation. About 30 minutes later, 2 firefighters arrived at the scene. They approached Annie and inquired about the situation. She explained what she had discovered and without wasting any time, the men sprang into action. As they approached the storm drain, the stray dog started to growl at the firefighters. The firefighters stopped because they were afraid the dog might bite them. Annie, on the other hand, knew what to do. Annie approached the dog gently, assuring it that the firefighters were there to help. She held out a treat for the dog to distract, allowing the firefighters to approach the drain and investigate. With the stray dog safely moved aside, the firefighters proceeded to open the storm drain to see what was inside. By this point, a crowd had formed around the firemen, curious to see what they were doing with the storm drain in the middle of the busy street. After a few tense minutes, the firemen revealed what had captured the stray dog's attention inside the drain. In one of the firemen's arms, there was a tiny kitten. All of the bystanders were shocked, but that was not the end of it. The firemen went back into the storm drain 4 more times, and each time they emerged, they were holding another kitten in their arms. Annie was amazed by what she was seeing. She had seen something when she looked inside the drain earlier, but she had no idea there were 5 cute kittens stuck inside. At that moment, the stray dog squirmed out of Annie's arms and happily ran over to the firemen who were holding the kittens. As soon as the dog spotted the tiny kittens, his tail wagged with excitement. He approached them, sniffing and wagging his tail, while the kittens responded with cute little meows. Annie asked the firemen how the young kittens ended up in the storm drain. The firemen explained to Annie that the kittens were most likely swept into the drain during a heavy rain. Although they were trapped, they weren't starving. Given this information, Annie turned her attention to the stray dog. She had suspected it before, but now she was certain that the stray dog had been sharing his food with the kittens all along, which had helped them survive. After witnessing the selfless act of the stray dog, Annie made up her mind. She told the firemen she would take the kittens home with her. She would provide them with love and care until they were ready to be adopted by new families. The firemen agreed and handed the kittens over to Annie. The young woman started walking home, but then she stopped and called out to the stray dog, saying, "Come on, Benny, it's time to go home." Benny happily bounded up to her, and together they took care of all the kittens. Annie found loving homes for 4 of them. When the kittens grew older, Annie decided to keep one for herself. She had developed a deep love for them, just as she had for Benny, who now had a loving home to call his own. Annie loved the shaggy dog so much that she couldn't let him stay on the streets. She decided to bring him home and give him a cozy place to live, just like she did with the kittens. The family lived happily together, with Fudge the cat and Benny the dog feeling safe and loved. They knew that Annie would never let them end up on the streets again because she loved them dearly and they loved her just as much in return. What an incredible story. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to keep up to date with more amazing tales.